The shirt tore with a sound sharp enough to cut through the music, the laughter, the low thrum of the bar. For a heartbeat, the crowded room froze. A woman gasped, clutching desperately at the fabric that now hung in tatters against her chest, her face burning with shame. The biker who had ripped it grinned with a wolfish arrogance, his hand still poised in the air, as if the act had been some sort of victory. His friends roared with laughter, the kind of cruel chorus that thrives on humiliation. But then, just as the woman tried to gather herself, something stopped the entire room. Not her trembling, not the tears welling in her eyes, but the sight revealed beneath the torn blouse, ink, a stark, disciplined pattern etched into skin, the unmistakable eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. The laughter faltered. Across the room, a man rose slowly from his seat. He hadn't spoken all night. He hadn't drawn attention to himself. His presence had been like a shadow among the noise, unnoticed, almost forgotten. Yet in this single moment, as the tattoo glinted under the dim lights of the bar, every head turned to him, as if pulled by some silent gravity. His gaze was calm, steady, unreadable. But in the stillness of that look, men twice his size felt suddenly small. The woman lowered her eyes, holding her shirt together with trembling fingers. She had not come here to be mocked or stripped of her dignity. She had come for something simple, an evening with friends, a moment of laughter after long weeks of work. But fate had placed her in the path of men who mistook cruelty for strength. And fate had also placed in the room a Marine, whose silence carried more weight than any shout could. The man's name was Daniel Hayes. Once his voice had carried over desert winds, cutting through chaos with orders that saved lives. Now he rarely spoke at all. Years of service had carved something deep into him, a gravity that seemed to silence the noise of the world around him. To strangers, he was only another broad-shouldered veteran in a weathered jacket, sitting alone with a glass untouched before him. But those who had truly known him, his brothers who had not returned, would have told a different story. Daniel had enlisted at 19, a boy still carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from his hometown football field. War had a way of aging men overnight. The desert sun had burned his skin, the loss of friends had burned his soul. He had seen courage, fear, loyalty, betrayal. He had carried men whose names were now etched into white headstones, and he had carried memories that weighed far heavier. The Corps had left its mark on him, not just in ink but in bone-deep discipline. Every step he took, every breath, carried the echo of battles fought far from home. When he returned, the world had not paused for him. It had kept moving, kept laughing, kept arguing about things that once seemed small to him but now loomed absurdly large in civilian life. He did not resent the world for it. He only kept his silence. For silence was the shield of those who knew too much about the cost of words. And now, in this bar thick with the smell of beer and sweat, silence wrapped around him again. The biker shifted, his grin faltering as he noticed the shift in the room. The tattoo he had revealed was not just ink. It was a banner, a symbol, a warning, and behind it stood a man who had earned the right to wear it, not through swagger, but through sacrifice. Still, silence ruled. No one stepped forward. No one helped the woman gather her dignity. She was left trembling, standing in the middle of laughter turned uneasy. That was the cruelest part of it, the complicity of the crowd. Men and women sat with their drinks, their eyes darting but their bodies unmoved, as though justice was someone else's burden. The biker sneered, trying to regain the ground slipping beneath him. He leaned closer to the woman, his breath reeking of whiskey, his hand twitching as though he might reach again. That was when Daniel moved, not quickly, not with the explosive rage one might expect. He stood with measured calm, each motion deliberate, like a man who had no need to rush because time itself seemed to bend around him. He crossed the floor without a word, and for a moment it was unclear whether he would stop at the woman's side or at the man's throat. The biker's laughter returned, louder now, forced, as though to mask the sudden chill crawling up his spine. He puffed out his chest, ready to meet him with bravado. But bravado had never stood long against the kind of stillness that lived in Daniel Hayes. When Daniel finally stood before them, The woman looked up, startled, her lips parting as though she might speak, but he shook his head once, gently, as if to tell her she need not say a word. His gaze shifted to the biker, and in that gaze, centuries of honor and sacrifice seemed to rest. No fists flew, no words cut, just silence, and silence was heavier than iron. The biker, desperate to break it, spat words that dripped with defiance, insults and empty threats. Yet every syllable seemed to wilt as it left his mouth, falling uselessly against Daniel's unflinching calm. This was not a man who needed to prove himself. This was a man whose life had been proof enough. The woman straightened, still clutching her torn blouse. The tattoo on her shoulder seemed to burn brighter now, as if the eagle, globe, and anchor themselves were watching. She had been a Marine, too. That ink was not decoration. It was memory, loss, discipline, loyalty. It told a story the biker could not begin to fathom. In that instant, something shifted in the crowd, heads lifted, eyes sharpened. Men who had remained silent before now stood a little taller, shame prickling at their skin for not acting sooner. Women who had looked away now looked back, their gazes burning with solidarity. One by one, respect began to ripple through the room, not because Daniel demanded it, but because he embodied it. And then, like a tide breaking, others rose. A man at the bar rolled up his sleeve, revealing the same emblem inked onto his arm. Another tugged at the chain around his neck, showing dog tags that had long rested against his chest. Quietly, without ceremony, veterans scattered across the bar stood in silent unity. The room, once thick with laughter and cruelty, now throbbed with reverence. The biker saw it. His grin collapsed into something brittle. He tried to laugh again, but no one joined him. His friends shifted uneasily, their earlier mockery strangled by the sudden isolation pressing in on them. In the face of honor, arrogance looked small, almost pitiful. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, steady, cutting through the stillness. He said only what needed to be said, that dignity was not a game, that some things are sacred, that respect is not given to the loudest voice, but to the quietest sacrifice. And when he finished, he returned to silence, because silence was enough. The biker's hand fell from its swaggering pose. His eyes darted, searching for support that no longer existed. The crowd, once complicit, now stood against him, not with fists or shouts, but with a wall of silent honor. And in that silence, he was already defeated. The woman's shoulders squared. For the first time since her shirt had been torn, she stood not as a victim but as a Marine. Her voice, calm and steady, carried the weight of her service, a reminder that she had faced worse and survived, that her dignity could not be taken by the weak. The bar held its breath. Then, slowly, respectfully, people began to clap. Not the raucous applause of entertainment, but the solemn rhythm of recognition. It spread until the entire room was filled with the sound of hands honoring not just one Marine, but all who had carried that burden. The biker slunk away, his arrogance crushed beneath the weight of what he could never understand. Daniel returned to his seat as though nothing extraordinary had happened. His drink remained untouched, the condensation pooling silently beneath it. The woman, now shielded by strangers who had once been silent, found comfort in the simple act of being seen with respect. Later, people would speak of that night in hushed tones. They would say it was the moment they understood what true strength looked like, that it wasn't fists or fury, but silence and honor. And somewhere in that reflection, Daniel's words lingered. That dignity is not given, it is lived. That sacrifice does not ask for applause, but it deserves respect. That some battles are fought without weapons, yet leave deeper scars. For those listening now, the lesson was simple. Never mistake silence for weakness. Behind it may lie stories of courage you cannot imagine, losses you cannot measure, and strength you cannot break. So wherever you are, carry this story with you, share it, remember it, and let it remind you that the quietest among us may be the strongest. If this story moved you, leave a comment with where you're watching from, share your thoughts about what respect truly means, and subscribe for more stories that honor those who carry silent strength in a noisy world.